Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. This has been a historic week by any standards in the annals of world diplomacy. Iran and the United States, or rather Iran and the E3+3 or the P5+1 reached a landmark agreement which will hopefully put to rest international concerns about Iran's nuclear program and also begin the process of ending the isolation of Iran because of sanctions by the UN, the European Union and the United States. Joining me to discuss this week's agreement between Iran and the P5+1 is Professor Steve Miller of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Thank you very much for joining us on Rajya Sabha TV.
My pleasure to be here.
The Iran deal has been something which Barack Obama has made a top priority. He got off to a slow start in terms of his engagement with the Iranians, but ever since Rouhani became president, things have moved at a fairly high speed. And in the last year and a half, it seemed as if the Obama administration's pulled out all the stops to ensure that they reach a deal. Why is this so important for Barack Obama and for the U.S.?
Well, you know, if you put it in a wider context, the United States has been concerned, at least since the middle of the Clinton administration some 20 years ago, that Iran's nuclear activities were leading it in the direction of a weapon. The United States is generally opposed to nuclear proliferation, but it's particularly concerned about a state like Iran with which it has very negative relations and where it is seen as a kind of rival and troublesome player in a very important region of the world. So the U.S. has been struggling for a long time to get a grip on this potential threat. For the longest time, the effort was to pressure Iran in order to force it basically to stop and reverse its program. This was the policy of the Bush administration. It was the policy that was more or less continued in the early part of the Obama administration, although Obama introduced a more substantial element of diplomacy. But that policy failed, basically. So the era of nuclear-related sanctions over the last dozen or so years since this issue came to the head of the kind of international agenda resulted in a world in which the Iranians had 20,000 installed centrifuges. 9,000 of them were
They kept growing and growing throughout the
sanctions. They kept growing. The slope of Iran's centrifuges went like this. And on that chart you could draw the lines like this, and it was this sanctions resolution, that sanctions resolution, the next sanctions resolution, and the curve just went like this. So maybe there was some point at which Iran would have broken and capitulated, but we never arrived at that point. There was, as many people will recall, serious consideration of the military option. It's sort of a standard mantra among American
all options are on the table.
All options are on the table, and there have been phases of this crisis where it was thought that military strike was edging into reality. And of course the Israelis have their own concerns about Iran and were serious contemplators of the military option. So what we see here is the culmination, basically, of a couple of decades of struggling to find a way of constraining Iran's military nuclear option. For Obama, I think it's also a major foreign policy success. It's a legacy issue. So I think these guys have been interested, this particular subset of the Iranian elite has been interested both in a deal, but perhaps more importantly in repositioning Iran in the international setting for a long time.
I wanted to pick up on that aspect because I know it's difficult to disentangle America's military concerns. Some would say that those concerns have been exaggerated in the past and there have been differences of opinion within the U.S. establishment, but they have been there on the table. But if we disentangle those concerns from the wider geopolitics, for Obama, how important is this deal from the point of view of opening a new path for America to work in a difficult region with a country that has traditionally been US's ally before
Right.
the 79 revolution. So in other words, is he looking at the nuclear deal as something which takes a problem off the table and then opens the door for a much wider kind of engagement, or is it purely a military strategic issue that he's trying to deal with right now?
Well, I think that the approach that they took was to demarcate the nuclear question as the paramount issue because of the importance of preventing the nuclearization of Iran as a military power. But the president, even in the last 24 hours since the deal was announced, has already said that there's a potential here for an opening with Iran. I think it will be a mixed picture, though, because we're going to have a serious debate in the United States. There's going to be a lot of criticism. The Congress is going to have 60 days to examine and criticize.
We'll come to that in a second.
Yes. But I mention that in this context simply because there are going to be a lot of people in the Washington scene, including proponents, who are going to be saying, we have to resist Iran's ambitions in the region. We have to.
So the selling of the deal may generate rhetoric even.
Well, I think both rhetoric and behavior. That is to say, there will be an effort in Washington to signal that we're not going to turn a blind eye to Iran's misbehavior, right? And there's also going to be, to anticipate another of your questions, there will be a serious effort to reassure our friends and allies in the region. And both of those will mean that the rivalrous aspect of U.S.-Iran relations will remain present. But what may turn out to be true is that getting this nuclear issue off the agenda, or setting it aside and boxing it off in ways that make it less urgent, will allow us to cooperate in those areas where our interests are compatible. One of the things that the Iranians have complained about for quite some time, and they took it as a very serious signal of American intent, because I've been involved over many years with these Track 2 dialogues with Iranian colleagues, so you learn a lot from those exercises. And what I often heard was Iranian colleagues saying, America's hostility to Iran, its relentless, implacable hostility, is revealed by the fact that you won't cooperate with us even when it's in your interest to do so. Iran's public enemy number one on the international stage was Saddam Hussein. They would have been happy to cooperate with us if we hadn't also framed that as a threat to them. Iran had its own issues with the Taliban, and in fact were quite helpful in the early stages of American involvement in Afghanistan. Iran was very much at odds with Al-Qaeda, and which regarded the Iranians basically as Persian infidels in the kind of great game within Islam. So there were a number of respects, and today both Iran and the United States are counterpoised against the Islamic State in Iraq. But we always had limited or no cooperation with them on these issues, and where we did fleetingly cooperate, it was always very temporary and completely tactical, right? So I think that now there may be more room for cooperating with Iran in areas where we have harmonious interests.
So a door is opening, undoubtedly.
Yes.
But let's look for a second at factors that might lead to that door slamming shut again. The contours of the deal which has been agreed to are quite complex, but in broad terms it requires Iran to curtail its enrichment program. Heavy water reactor will be remodeled. There will be much more intrusive inspections. The additional protocol of the IAEA will be implemented. Iran is committed to giving a much more full accounting of its previous activities, including so-called possible military dimensions, which is always contested. In return for this, the US, the EU, and the UN will be withdrawing sanctions. There is a provision for those sanctions to snap back. Now, where in this complex set of assurances and counter-assurances do you reckon there are dangers of the deal falling through or running into trouble?
Well, there's substantive questions, and then there are political and diplomatic questions. Substantively, it's invariably the case that there are compliance issues with the arms control agreement. Hard negotiators try. There are always gray areas or uncertain provisions and so on. And in areas of, in contexts of high levels of distrust, there's very little benefit of the doubt that you give to the other side. So
neither side is going to assume the other is acting in good faith to begin with?
Not to begin with. So it's quite possible that we'll see early allegations of Iranian noncompliance. It's also the case, to slide a little bit into the domestic political scene in the United States, but there are forces in the United States, influential actors, who do not want this deal and who have considerable capacity to derail it. So if the U.S. Congress introduces additional sanctions, for example, Iran has said explicitly this will be grounds for setting the...
Well, obviously that will be a deal breaker.
Right.
But surely, I mean, President Obama was pretty clear on day one when he said that I will veto any attempt by Congress to introduce new sanctions or to stand in the way. Does he have the power to hold firm on his position? Let's talk now about the domestic situation in the U.S., or is the balance of power precarious on Capitol Hill?
Well, the pivotal question will be whether Obama has a veto-proof level of support in the Congress. And
which means, for the benefit of our viewers, that he needs to have at least 2/3 of legislators on his side.
No, 1/3.
Well, that's right, exactly. 1/3 has to be.
Right.
In other words, the opponents should not be able to muster more than 2/3.
Exactly. So under the U.S. Constitution, to override a presidential veto, the Congress needs a 2/3 majority. And so that will boil down to whether the president can hold his own party together, and probably he will be able to do so, but with a fairly substantial caveat, which is in the United States we've spent since the Iranian Revolution in 1979 demonizing Iran, and we've painted a very black and white picture, right? If you go and look at what is the typical view in the United States of Iran, it's the world's leading state sponsor of terror. It's harsh to its own people. It aspires to be a regional hegemon. We still have this image in our head of Iranians chanting death to America. So
everybody saw Argo a few years ago.
Yes, exactly. Well, that revives some of those images.
Exactly.
But so if you are an American elected official, there is very little to be gained by generous behavior toward Iran. All right. So the last sanctions resolution in the United States Senate in 2010, the harsh Obama sanctions, passed the Senate by a vote of 99-0, right? And the other bloke was probably homesick. I mean, so there is an overwhelming bipartisan consensus that harsh and hostile behavior toward Iran is the default position.
Yet the attempts by some Republicans who scuttled the deal back in April were not successful. So there is
Obama thwarted those, and he did manage to discipline his own party to hold that together. Also, I think what may come out in the debate in the United States is the question of, if not this deal, then what is the alternative? So you have a deal which, whatever its faults and imperfections, introduces, as you very accurately described it, very considerable constraints on Iran's nuclear capability and unprecedented levels of transparency. Right? Now, if you compare this to some perfect deal where Iran rids itself of all of its nuclear capabilities, it looks relatively inadequate. But that's not the real alternative. The real alternative is something like the status quo ante, right?
Which has prevailed for years, exactly.
Exactly. And so what do we know about that? We don't know what Iran would do if the deal falls apart. But we know that they're capable of deploying as many as 4,000 centrifuges in a year. They did that in 2009. So people are saying, well, this deal will expire in 10 years, and that's no good.
Yeah.
But without the deal, in 10 years, Iran could have another 40,000 centrifuges.
Exactly.
Right? Iran was starting
and have them at Fordo, which is insulated from bombing.
Right.
If they wanted to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Iran was starting to modernize its centrifuges, meaning that they were going to more advanced versions that were more efficient, meaning that they could produce more nuclear material in shorter periods of time.
Yeah.
This agreement precludes that for a 10 or 15-year period. But in the absence of an agreement, in 5 or 10 years, we could be dealing with thousands of more advanced centrifuges.
Yeah.
Iran, at its peak, and I think it was the early 2014 IAEA report, had in excess of 11,000 kilograms of enriched material, enriched to low levels of enrichment. This agreement will hold Iran to a maximum of 300 kilograms. Iran, before the deal, had in round numbers about 400 kilograms of 20% enriched material, which is much closer to bomb material. The agreement allows...
Which they wanted for their research reactor.
Yes. The deal does not permit them to hold any inventory of 20% enriched material.
They're limited to 3.5%. Yeah.
And Iran was producing 200 kilograms a month of enriched material, so its inventory was climbing. And of course, the 200 kilograms would grow month by month as they introduce more centrifuges. That's the most likely alternative to this deal.
And Obama can very easily point to that scenario to say, look, what we've got is much better. There was a very terse but angry statement by Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, in reaction to the announcement, where he essentially called this a historic blunder. The world would come to regret it. Do you think that's rhetoric on his part because he's under fire domestically? Some of his critics say, look, why did you have to go and antagonize and get involved with domestic American politics in and perhaps you overplayed your hand? So is he grandstanding, or is there a danger that Israel might actually actively try to scuttle this deal?
Well, Israel has many friends in the U.S. Congress, and my expectation is that the Israelis will hope that their friends will interfere with this deal. I believe that.
So Netanyahu will continue to lobby and deploy all his clout on Capitol Hill to ensure that this is vetoed in some, that the presidential veto would be overridden.
Well, he called a cabinet meeting for yesterday evening, the day of the announcement of the deal, at which he orchestrated the unanimous rejection of the deal by the Israeli cabinet. He then gave a public statement in which he described it as a historic blunder and a gamble with the future of Israel. These don't, to me, seem like the actions of a man who's in a good mood. And he could have said, we don't like this deal, but we can live with it. He could have said, we would have handled it differently, but we respect the policies of our friends, the Americans. But instead, he said, Barack Obama has made a catastrophic error. So whatever he does from here on out, that's a huge signal to his friends and followers about his position. And I think the explanation is quite simple. Netanyahu and a considerable portion of the Israeli body politic believe that the Islamic Republic, the theocracy, is committed to the destruction of Israel, and that nuclear weapons in the hands of a state that has those aspirations represents an existential threat to the state of Israel, and therefore the only acceptable outcome
is for
by whatever
to have any
is zero nuclear capability of any sort that could lead to a weapon. Now, reactors are one thing, because a reactor in and of itself doesn't have any weapons implications.
But zero enrichment is
But enrichment or reprocessing, basically there's a uranium path to the bomb and a plutonium path to the bomb, and as far as Israel is concerned, Iran's capabilities in both of those categories should be zero.
Now the question people in the region are going to ask is, will Netanyahu's efforts to derail this deal, be confined to lobbying in the beltway of Washington? Or might he do things regionally, either militarily, which was the threat that was always left dangling over the Iranians over the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, the talk always was that, look, you better negotiate and give up, otherwise we can't control the Israelis, right? So that threat remains, or perhaps Israel working with other countries in the Gulf region, who I presume are equally unhappy at what's happening. How do you see that angle, the regional angle, playing out?
Well, the Israelis and the Saudis in particular have been extremely discomfited by this move in multiple ways, I think. They're uneasy about the relatively constructive interaction between the United States and Iran, which is changing the whole chemistry of the region potentially.
So it's geopolitical unease rather than nuclear-related unease?
I think it varies. I think the Saudis are more geopolitical and the Israelis are more nuclear. I think there's real concern in the region that the lifting of the sanctions is going to strengthen Iran in ways that will enable it to be a more active player in the region.
Undoubtedly. I mean, if you look at the huge manufacturing, human resources that Iran has, I mean, this is a powerhouse waiting to emerge, as it were.
Yeah, Iran is a country of 80 million people. It has a highly educated elite, a literate population. Unlike some of the small Gulf states, which are heavily dependent on oil, Iran has oil, but it's only 15 or so % of its economy.
Has a lot of manufacturing.
Manufacturing and a lot of world-class talent. So now, a lot of that talent has been put to the purpose of evading sanctions over the last decade, and I think they've done pretty well at that. But there's just no question that removing all these constraints and irritants in Iran's economic relations with the world will create enormous opportunities. I also think that there's a substantial interest in Europe and Japan and places like that for the investment opportunities in Iran. For example, Iran is in the early stages of developing its huge natural gas holdings. And so far the main outside investors have actually been the Chinese. But the big Western energy companies could get in there and become investors and so on. Iran has not been able to benefit from the kind of advanced technologies and the financial capacities of the Western energy sector since 1979. So there's oil and gas opportunities. So I think once the private sector has confidence that these sanctions are really going to be lifted and that you're not going to be running big risks going into Iran, I think that you're going to see
so this changes
investment boom.
This changes the geopolitics of the region. This changes Iran's economic capabilities. We don't have very much time, perhaps just 30 seconds or so. But are there domestic concerns within Iran or domestic challenges within Iran that we haven't factored so far? Or do you think that the implementation, at least from the domestic point of view in Iran, will proceed smoothly?
Well, Iran has its own tangled domestic politics, and they're largely opaque to outsiders. I think we don't understand very well. You have, at least as I see it, several competing structures of power. You have the formal government, you have the theocracy, and you have the Revolutionary Guard, which is a very powerful and somewhat autonomous actor. And we don't understand, or at least I don't understand very well, how those structures interact with one another. But what we know is that Rouhani and Zarif and company have been committed to this path of diplomacy and détente.
And they clearly have the confidence of the supreme leader.
They certainly have had his public support. Having had the opportunity to interact a lot with Iranian colleagues and to visit Tehran a number of times, I would say that one of the most surprising things about that was to realize that a very large fraction of the Iranian elite, I would say from Khatami and the reformers through Rafsanjani and the sort of traditional conservatives were in favor of some sort of rapprochement with the United States. Now there's still a portion of their spectrum which is rejectionist and hostile to the United States. We hear those voices. Those are sometimes the loudest voices, so they attract the most attention. And I think they do have some capacity to disrupt. But from what I can tell, the Supreme Leader has backed this initiative. He's praised the negotiators. They've undoubtedly made their peace. They've had months now. So the main concessions were made back in the spring. So I think they've had time to make their peace with the big compromises that they've had to make. And so my guess is that they may have an easier time than Obama. Because we're going to have a messy, noisy debate. And among other things, in Washington, there's always the unavoidable reality of the polarization, the partisan polarization, On every major initiative of the Obama administration, he's gotten 0 Republican votes. There's little reason to think they're going to back him on this one.
On that note, Professor Steve Miller, I'm afraid we're going to have to end our discussion. Thank you very much for joining us on Rajya Sabha TV.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode of IST. Do join us again next week with another guest. Thank you very much.